We are so delighted that he is here today to talk to us about Gen Z learner identities and differentiated language instruction. Please help me welcome Dr. Garza.
Thank you. Angelica, thank you so much. You always are overly kind and over generous, but I have to admit, after the elections, any good kind words in my direction, I take with a great deal of joy. So thank you for that. And thank you all. I know how incredibly busy this time of the year is, and I know how incredibly busy you all are with the kind of work we do to take time to join us. And those of you who are joining us virtually, thank you as well. I'm being overly, I think, kind of trying to be empathetic here, largely because of the topic of what we're talking about today, which has everything to do with feeling as though we, all of us who teach, and our learners who are in our classrooms as well, belong there. And by that, I mean really feeling belongingness. Interesting kind of new word, but I want us to think about that as we go through looking at the Gen Z learner, a little bit of differentiated instruction that I hope I can convince some of you is worth the blood, sweat, and tears it does take to get it to work in our classrooms. But most of all, I hope that by the end of 3 minutes, so we have time to chat with each other, you feel that you too belong. Let's dive in. Let's get into this. Before I start, very quickly, I always want to take 30 seconds to acknowledge the land in which we, wonderful campus and university, stand and where we are standing. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayagohno, or Cayuga Nation. Gayagohno are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on the land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State itself, and the United States of America. So we acknowledge the painful history of the Gayagohno dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the Gayagohno people and the past, the present, to these lands and to the waters of the region. So thank you for inviting me here. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to the history of this area for allowing this beautiful university. I want to start off, obviously, talking a bit about those wonderful human beings who've been in your classes for about the time COVID was a particular. Beginning around 2018, maybe you noticed a shift in not simply the who were the constituents of quantitatively, but also qualitatively. Who are they here in our class? So quick look at this group that followed the millennials, which I remember very much from 10 years ago, those students who would have been in our class. First part that we've now, the 21st century that we've lived through, that generation passed through. You may remember some of the movement. Remember that? Regardless of gender, weird. Everyone was drinking some kind of IPA or brewing their own, and no one has an opinion about politics whatsoever because there are more important things in life. And then suddenly, it comes as if someone sitting in our classrooms, were numbers of individual students who not only wanted to hear what we were saying, why we were saying, what did those individual bits for them, relevance, Asian, Russian, French, German, your world language have to do with them. Realized we were looking not only at a different learner, but a different gender. As it got to be named. I love this particular inspiration. It gives us this idea that has a few really important markers in it. Millennials, and maybe part of what we say, we try to find reasons that generations are the way they are. I think of myself, a boomer. Millennials were born during a time of economic growth, massive, probably over amounts of money flowing, and therefore never or rarely worried about who's going to pay the tuition. Do I need to have a job while I'm trying to do my 4-year undergraduate career and so forth. And really, we're at the very beginning. That's when we began to see cell phones in everybody's hand. That kind of mobile phone pioneers. Gen Zers, in contrast, were born as the economy was at one of its lower points and have always, from their beginning, needed to worry. Maybe it was rentals at home or themselves as new students. Who's going to pay the bills? How will they get paid? How many jobs do I need a job at? How many jobs do I need? So really different situation about job security and about feeling belongingness simply because of money situation. They're also the first generation to be born with this device in their hands as children. And you've seen, I saw this actually. I don't have children. My wife and I decided about that a long time ago, but this, as I would be in an airport and I'd see a little tiny child in a crib, in a bassinet in the airport, holding onto a cell phone and swiping. Before it could utter two syllables together, it knew how to swipe left and swipe right. It boggled the mind. Well, that is our generation. Generation B. So they are now mobile natives, very different from those who preceded them. So let's take that as our kind of background. We've got this new group of learners that now no longer new. They've been around with us, as I said, from about 2018, 2019, just before COVID, which also is going to be a big marker on this group of learners in just a little bit that I'll talk about. We're also dealing now, interestingly, with a very different phenomenon in terms of proficiency level. From our first year's classes on, and I hope all have noticed this, or maybe don't hope you've noticed this, but you probably just have noticed that even in a first year class, and goodness knows in a second or third or fourth year class, absolutely you've noticed that you're following the same syllabus, you're following the same curriculum that you followed for years and years and years, and suddenly more and more in the same class at the same time in the same curriculum, a group of students is exactly where you think they should be at this time. And let's just say it's a second year class and they're intermediate low, reaching an intermediate mid threshold. Yay for us, that's what we should be doing. But another group of students in the same class are really struggling to get out of novice. And then another group in that same class are already way ahead and looking at you for what else can I do? I kind of have done everything. Is there some way I want to get, move faster? Let's go further. What is this sudden development? Another Gen Z phenomenon of actually really realizing that our learners in our classes are individuals. It is not a tiny bit of personal history here, what my classes were when I began in 1976 studying Russian, which is at a university not unlike this beautiful institution, but much smaller, all white, all privileged, and all of them had families that went back at least 3 generations having attended a university or college. So you wouldn't see a first-gen student, someone who, me, I was called back at that time, this term that has become, that was then and still is a derogatory term, a scholarship student. It meant that I see your family never went to college. So yeah, right? And not being white ethnically and not being part of what would be the kind of Ivy League vibe, that sense that I did not belong at this institution. I didn't belong in my classes. That's where this whole theme is coming from. But at that time, one struggled simply to keep up with the coursework, to keep that proficiency level going. With our new Gen Z learners now, though, getting older Gen Z now, our second half of Gen Z happening right now, in fact, that difference is not anything they choose to suppress. If they are at different levels, most of these learners will simply let you know, I'm not there. I can't do that assignment because, and they'll tell you, or they'll be saying, I'm ready to move on, but my classmates are holding us all back. Or they'll be right where you think they should be, but they'll be all over the board. So proficiency level, as we know, moving us from the novice all the way to advanced high levels, varies not from year to year of classes, as we probably thought it used to be. That language does not proceed in a linear fashion or way. You start in first year, you finish with novice high or threshold intermediate, you go to second year and you finish intermediate mid, you go to third year and you're in intermediate high to threshold advanced, and you finish fourth year, and there you are, boom, you're fluent, quote unquote, right? No, that's not how language learning proceeds, and that's certainly now not how our learners proceed in the language. So more diversity in our classes. Now, the oops, it should come up. There we go. The QR code there, by the way, if you're interested, if you have not noticed yet that the brand new ACTFL proficiency guidelines are out, they're there and for free. So grab that QR code while it's up there, or you can just go to the ACTFL website and take a look at them there. The 2024 ACTFL proficiency guidelines are continuing with the, have continued now in my view, even improving on what's already been there since 1985. Oh, thank you. There we go. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you. With giving descriptors for the languages in beautiful ways that help us integrate them now with the standards of language learning, world language standards that help us integrate our communities, make connections with other fields, allow us to explore more about our cultures and so forth, that you all know the 5 Cs. But what I really, really appreciate in reference to the talk today is that the standards now also talk very particularly, especially in the proficiency guidelines, especially at the levels of intermediate, about how important it is to attend to all of our learners in our classrooms. You'll see this more articulated now in the standards. So they're really, I think, important us to revisit not to assume that we understand what the standards are just because we've been there once before. There we go. Perfect. On top of it, beautiful. On top of differences now in the actual Gen Z learner identities and on top of proficiency level distinctions, we also are constantly dealing with, in all of our classes, regardless of generation, differences in ways that individuals, we sitting in this room, probably occupy in that pie chart of 3 types of learner, all 3 types of learners sitting in the group right now. That each of us has a propensity or a desire to, an attraction to one type of learning more than another. I'm very much myself more a visual learner than anything else. Some of you might want to hear things, the old audio-lingual method, listening to things first before producing. Some of you are very kinesthetic and want things actually acted out, hands-on, move around the room, touch things, look at bits of reality and fill them in. Because we've always had these groups of learners in our classes, we should always have been attending to this division or this distinction. But I wanted just to add that to the mix as we began talking more about quite how different our students are now in the 21st century. So to give us a sense now, what does this look like in action? Let's take a look, if you think back, at profiles of learners in our world language courses. And the then I'm using here is probably around 2000 rather than 1976 when I started, but even then back in 76 and then in 2000, we're about the same. That picture on the left looked very much like what my first year Russian class was like at Haverford College in 1976. Very heavily, if not in this case, entirely white, moneyed, privileged, long history of going to a 4-year college for education, compared to what many of our classrooms look like now, of the image on the right. Much more diverse ethnically, certainly more diverse in terms of access to education, many more first-generation students attending colleges and universities in the US than ever before in the 2000s. And also very different, going back to all the things we just looked at, learner types, both in terms of style as well as in terms of proficiency levels in our classes. So extremely diverse client that we're looking at. Now the big item that I think has been the subject of so much conversation already for the last 5 years, but I can't reiterate it enough. And here I will make just a very, very tiny sidebar officially, because I feel it's my both professional duty, but also my civic duty, that one has to think about the moment of November of 2024, the times we're in right now, and what we are going to see beginning in January of 2025 may indeed be one of the most important, I want to call it sea changes that we have seen in a while in this country in terms of what we can do in our classes. I know in the state of Texas, I am literally legally restricted on words that I can use in my classroom. Words like diversity, inclusion, equity. I cannot use them as part of the way I describe my program or the work that my programs do. Mercifully, for now at least, I can still do my research and actually still teach courses that have these concepts built into them, but I'm at the moment much more confined with what I can do outwardly. I think we need to be very aware at the moment now that these intersectional identities are for not just our Gen Zers, but for our next generation, Gen Alpha, which is not even 3 years away. Can you imagine? We're just getting used to Gen Z, but Gen Alpha is on its way in, so get ready for that. But if we think about the difference of what our lives were like and our classrooms were like and our learners were like, not even 10 years ago, some of the questions I want to talk about now, we didn't even ask. I wasn't even sure they were questions. So questions now in our classrooms of think about the textbooks that you're using right now before I get into this. Think about, bring to fore the materials you're using in your courses as I speak, from textbooks to handouts that you give to the kinds of ways you set up conversations, to think about who's actually sitting in your room. Gender, long thought to be a binary distinction, we have known for a long time is certainly non-binary, and yet most of the materials we teach still, more languages, only account for 2 genders and give very little movement for how we may talk about someone who does not identify as male or female. So think about, for example, in Russian, how do I account for someone who does not see themselves as on, he, or она, she? And to use они, they, grammatically seems unfitting as well. So how do we attend to that? Indeed, I'll stay with Russian for just 1 second here. Russian doesn't even allow me to use the same forms for getting married for a woman and for a man. A woman steps out behind a man, она выйдет замуж, выходит замуж, and a man, like this, женится на ком, he marries onto someone. Yeah. So then the lovely that if you say they got married, они поженились, that accounts for same-sex marriage, but no other way can I then manifest without something that will check with my speaker as well of Russian here to say он женился на русского sounds a little bit, or на русском, I guess, на русском sounds a little bit unusual. Yeah, yeah. And yet, how else do we say he married a Russian man in the language? So think about gender now, and not just as a fact of identification, but rather pedagogical import. How do we teach grammatical gender in our languages? How do our languages deal with it? Thinking always about race and ethnicity as our classrooms have become, and this isn't simply my own positionality speaking here, we know this from both census reports, one that I shout out as loudly as I can. In 2020, ostensibly it was because it was during COVID, the reason for this problem I'll say in a second. In 2020, the state of Texas went majority, for the first time, majority non-white. It is now majority Latino population, Hispanic. I don't like that term, but that was the term that Texas uses, Hispanic population. The reason given for it was not announced. Our wonderful governor did not come out and say, hey, congratulations, Texas, we're now majority Hispanic. Let's all celebrate the fact that we have more Mexican-born of origin Texans than Anglo-Texans, because, as he would claim, well, during COVID, we had other important things to be worried about. I think there were other reasons that our governor chose not to let white Texans know that the state was now no longer majority white. But that notwithstanding, you know our classrooms do not look the way they did 30 years ago. We know this. So we think that we used to think of white as simply the marker for things in our textbooks for, look at some, I can pull some images if you'd like, but I pulled textbooks from 2020 onward to present day. even in my own, these are my own faculty members at the University of Texas who've done wonderful textbooks and wonderful online materials, like Carl Blythe and his entire crew's fantastic Français Interactif, this beautiful online French course. We'll have a picture, the front cover of chapter 7, I believe it is, which is studying in Russia, in France. And there's a picture of our own students studying in Lyon, all of them white females, all of them. So imagine yourself being one of these Mexican young men or a Mexican woman that does not identify as female, looking at this picture and saying, do I even see myself here? Of course I don't. Do I think I will ever study in Lyon? Probably not. So we look now at white, we look at non-white, and we look at non-majority in our language books as well. This includes our indigenous populations within our own regions. How many of our Russian language textbooks talk about the numerous indigenous populations in Russian Siberian lands or toward the Central Asian regions, other than in these terribly minoritized roles? If you do see a Caucasian person in a Russian textbook, he will be a taxi driver, almost always, or a construction worker. But they're rarely, if ever, personified or appear in our textbooks as a main character. Again, someone our students can identify with. Sexuality. This is one area where our students, I believe, are most engaged and also feeling a lot of sense of ownership of their own sexuality, as we all should, but not that it doesn't appear in our textbooks, that we ever have characters that will simply appear as gay or lesbian or LGBT plus identified. So we tend to go with a heteronormative presentation in all of our materials. There's always a husband, a wife, usually 2.3 children and 2.2 dogs in the picture. And it's always, here's my mom, here's my dad. We live in this wonderful apartment in the city. We drive a car. Everyone is all good, but we don't represent non-heteronormative and rarely introduce LGBTQ plus in our group. Associated with what I was just giving that portrait of the heteronormative family is economic positionality. Our families tend to always be in our books and materials relatively wealthy. They always seem to live in nice apartments. We don't see people who are struggling. We don't see homelessness in our textbooks. We don't see situations and positionalities that we know our own students are in, and that we know occur in the regions where our languages are spoken. We know that when we're teaching, I keep going back to Russian because that's what I speak, but when we're teaching French, we know that in Paris, in the city, in the suburbs, that situations of economic difference occur, but we don't show this. So plus or minus wealth needs to be shown, class, not just always showing that kind of ruling, powerful class, which leads to the next one, only showing positive power, but also showing those who are not in power in our materials. Family settings, I already talked about the nuclear family, not including things like single parents or non-traditional families, 2 moms, 2 dads, and so forth, which our students all want to be able to say, is how do I say in this language, I have 2 moms or I have 2 dads? How do I say that? Educational context I take very personally, again, as a first gener, and so I'm seeing more and more first geners at the University of Texas in any way, but we need to think about it, their educational background and history, whether they are themselves first time at a university, first time in an educational setting that is not a school setting, but actually a larger, almost city-sized center, and whether they had access to education at all in their background. Did they know, for example, when they applied to college, what a letter of recommendation is? Because you ask, you ask a parent, for example, so this application says I need 3 letters of recommendation. What is that? Who do I ask for those? How do I get those? Are these things you can buy, right? Get those kinds of questions. And the last group, ability and disability status. I mean, we tend only to see able-bodied individuals. We rarely see disabled or dependent individuals who have dependencies. Neurodiversity, an increasing population, especially guys, watch out for this group post-COVID. And wait until Gen Alpha gets here, really can you imagine going through grade school on Zoom? And think about those 3 years of, say, you being in the 7th, 8th, or 9th grade entirely on Zoom. Our group that we have now, Gen Zers, we've seen increasing neurotypical neurodivergent and cases of different variations of mental illnesses, things I'm not equipped to deal with, obviously, but I can at least help I can ensure that my students have access to materials that can deal with these topics if they want to talk about themselves in the language. And finally, and this one obviously comes up also as part of identity, although less so with Gen Zers, is religious affiliation, Christian. And by Christian here, I'll be a little bit naughty in talking about Russia and about other countries that don't see Christianity as including Catholicism, and on the other side, even Orthodoxy as part of the larger mantra of Christianity. So even within the banners that we're used to thinking of a Judeo-Christian tradition, scare quotes, there is variation. I get this in Texas all the time of saying, oh, I thought so-and-so was a Christian. It turns out that he was a Catholic. We pause and say, no, well, so that would make him a Christian then. Well, not really, smile. So thinking more about including Christians, non-Christian, by that's what I mean, not simply talking about Islam, Jews, Muslims, and other religions, but also then students, many of them atheists or agnostic. So thinking about these individual personnel. Now, this is a long kind of laundry list, and one could even be more granular and make more distinctions. This is more to say, think about identity as being much, much more nuanced than I think for my generation we ever thought about it. So take all that learner difference and let's talk a bit about DI. So what exactly is differentiated instruction? The first definitions that we get, it's a relatively recent phenomenon, I want to say, in pedagogy, being applied to pedagogy, but it was almost certainly Tomlinson in 2003 that uses the examples that I think most of us now use in our research. Tomlinson, first, she talked about indications are, she writes here in her 2003 work, that most teachers make few proactive modifications based on learner variance. Differentiated, and here the term is coined, or academically responsive instruction. Love that. Academically responsive instruction. We respond as instructors to the individual identities. Provide student support based on a model of addressing student readiness, interest, and learning profile for a broad range of learners in mixed ability classroom settings. So from that definition that she gives in 2003, you can see the focus was really specifically on proficiency differences more than anything. A little bit about learner differences, but mostly it's about we're at different levels. So she's really focusing on, this would be the end of the millennials in our classrooms. We're gearing up for the coming of the Gen Zers. So we're still very much in millennials here, that we're looking just at mixed abilities or mixed proficiency levels. We don't really start seeing identity being rolled into this definition until very recently, about 2018, with pieces such as this by Ortega and others. There are student populations that are culturally, socially, and academically diverse in today's classrooms. A good kind of truism. This is what we're dealing with. They're typified by learners who underachieve and excel, students whose first language is other than the language of instruction, and thinking that about students, learners in our classes who don't have English as their base language to begin with. Students from diverse cultures and diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, students with different sexual orientations, motivated and unmotivated learners, and learners of various interests and modes of learning. Much more robust, a much more fulsome definition of how different learners can be in the classroom. So that now brings us to kind of what I would take as the most, getting us closer to today, 2021. I like this definition as my working definition for DI, for looking at differentiation and differentiated instruction. In a 2024 classroom, this is taken from Smith and Chestnutt, differentiation for equity from 2021. As diversity in higher education increases, teachers must find ways to adapt the curriculum and instructional methods to support student learning and access to content. While there are various methods for addressing adaptation and access to support learning, such as Beamish and Sagers in 2013, they posit differentiation as a useful tool. They were the first ones to mention this as ensuring equity in the classroom, equal access. So all of our learners are given equitable treatment in the classroom. From this perspective, differentiation would seem to be a moral obligation. I'm looking at you all now, right? So is it a moral obligation to you? I will admit, for me, it has become that. I do think it is my obligation as an instructor in class, not just to teach verbal aspect in Russian, not just to teach declensions and conjugations, not just to teach Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but to teach how to be a human being in Russian, not in Russia, but in Russian, in the language. And to all of my students, to get them all that access. So how do we go about that? A rationale, this is meant to be both a reality check, but also ultimately a booster. So I'm not saying, I'm going to kind of paraphrase John Kennedy, dead white guy, sorry, on this one, right? We don't go to the moon because it's easy, we're going to the moon because it's hard. So we don't do DI because it's easy, we're going to do DI because it's hard to do, but worth doing. So DI is not an easy answer, but it's effective. It's an effective approach. It can address style, identity, and or individual level differences. So it does everything from proficiency differences to individual identities. It can increase success rates and lower attrition, especially in the lictals. That is not a happy thought. That is based on empirical evidence. Studies done in the last 10 years DI has been implemented in classrooms have shown that we have actually hit proficiency goals at a greater rate of success, and sometimes, often, I will even go more efficiently, more quickly than we did using so-called traditional methods. There are tools for teaching the whole class. That's what we're going to do in the next couple of minutes. And that my favorite, ending on a very positive note, all instructors, everyone in this room, can teach all students. All of us have it in us, have it in our capacity to teach everybody who's sitting in our classes, all the different identities. You don't have to be those identities. You don't even have to, as it were, identify with those identities. You simply need to have some empathy and some flexibility in the way you handle the curriculum. So let me give you a couple of examples and see if I can push you in that direction to take the plunge here. And I'm hoping I hear some, I already do this. I didn't realize that was DI. You might be practicing some DI methods already or DI practices and not even know it. So for example, there are very few textbooks, curricula, or courses that I doubt in, say, whether it's first year or beginners, however you call your 001 level courses, that one of our functions would be talking about oneself. We've seen this in our proficiency guidelines and standards that, being able to talk about oneself. Okay, you get that. So see if you can identify, and I'm hoping you'll do 4 quick learner profiles that you probably have seen these learners in your own courses. So learner A, in talking about yourself, I'm going to give a biographical questionnaire, the usual name. In Russian, it's going to be last name, patronymic, first name. It might be things like, where do you live? What is your birthday? What is your age? But a biographical questionnaire, a reference sheet with a set of conversation formulas, such as my name is, I'm this many years old, I live in, I come from, those kind of things, right? So here's this learner A's task. Fill out an online questionnaire and be able to narrate its details. So that's a way of fulfilling talking about oneself. It's one way of getting that kind of information from that student. So who is learner A? How would you embody them? There's not much about ethnic. We're certainly not, ethnic identity. There's certainly nothing about even gender here, nothing about sexual orientation or sexual identity here. So who is this person? This is more about learner type, who could fill out an online questionnaire and then narrate the details of that questionnaire. What kind of learner is it? Is this an outgoing one, someone who likes to do role plays? Is this, please just chime on in, yeah. Yep, yes. It does not mean you're a bad learner either, right? This is not a judgment. What I love about DI, it's judgment free. This is saying, I want you to do what you do as you, but in this language, right? In this other language, exactly. So yeah, this is saying this person is comfortable not doing the performative stuff, but still you want them to know the forms. You want them to know, be able to get these expressions. Well, here's a way to get at it. Terrific, thank you. So let's contrast that with learner B. We give learner B an Instagram entry of personal information of the user. The home language, Instagram feed. So in this case, let's say in Russian Instagram with the second language translations there. So they see, this is what my Instagram page looks like in English. This is what an Instagram page looks like in Russian, side by side. Their task, construct your brand new Instagram profile feed in the target country / language and tell your friend what you put on that profile page. Who's our learner? Who's learner B? What do we think about them? Start with the fact that we're on Instagram. That's a clue. That's your first clue. So learner B is probably doing that a lot, right? Playing on the phone a lot, or on checking they're a little bit more social. They've got an Instagram feed. Am I still talking about yourself at all engaged here? Yeah. But a very different modality from a questionnaire. So what's the quality of the difference between filling out a questionnaire and giving the same information, but putting it on your Instagram page? You're still saying my name is, I'm from, they call me, I'm this many years old, or maybe just simply saying I'm young, I'm whatever, describing yourself. What's the difference there? Someone who's what about themselves, who's someone who's shy, reserved, doesn't really want people to know, very, keeps to themselves. This is someone who's a little bit more forthcoming with their identity, who's willing to say, yeah, I'm going to put it on social media. I've got no problem with that. I want people to know that here's who I am. Or even better, right? This is who I want you to know who I am, right? Everyone's going to know, what that is, right? We know about who we are and who our social media profiles are. They may not be the same people. You've been on these sites, you know this stuff. So, okay, let's say two more of this is the same. Still talking about ourselves, but learner C. Learner C gets a transcript from a student gathering. And we give them, with the transcript, a reference sheet with conversational formulas. Hi, I'm so-and-so. Who are you? I'm from. Where are you from? I'm this many years old. How old are you? We give them the formulas. And they get a task. As a group, say 3 or 4 students, play out a student mixer and get the biographical details of at least 3 of your classmates. So what's different? We're still getting the same thing. We're still talking about ourselves, but who are these learners? What are their markers? What do you think? Don't be shy. Yeah, they like working in groups. They, in fact, feel comfort working in group. They know they don't have to be front and center the whole time. Even that one student who's filling out the questionnaire online, I'd rather have some support. I like my buds around me. Yeah, much more collaborative. What else? Anything else about this kind of learner? Just from virtue of the fact that we're at a mixer, or we're asking them to be a mixer, this is a much more social group. This is a group that doesn't mind going up to a stranger and saying, hi, I'm so-and-so. Who are you? Right? Because we're asking them to do that, not only do that, but do that in a new language, in a different cultural setting. Yeah. And then finally, look at learner D. admit, I like learners D. So they get a job training video of interviewing techniques. So this is all, these students, by the way, these are all student profiles that I took from my own, last time I was teaching first year Russian during COVID. And with no names, these are 4 learners from that class or groups of learners. And in the same first year class, how different these tasks are to get at the same thing, talk about yourself, but in very different modalities. So learner D gets a job training video of interview techniques and a list again of key speech acts in the video. Can you tell me about yourself? Who are you? Where you're from? What college do you go to? What class are you in? What's your major? And their task with a partner is to act out a job interview for a job you want in a country where the language is spoken or a place where the target language is spoken. So who's this learner? Or these learners, two of them. Learner D. Yes, these are students who are like, I'm goal-oriented. I'm taking Italian because I want to work in Italy. You know, I have a fiance in Rome. I want to go to Italy and work there. So practical, what else is good? That's a great start. What else? Goal-oriented and ambitious. I love this. These are all nice together, right? These are learners who know why they're in the classroom. This, interestingly, is a group. The reason I said I love these students, belongingness for them is already in their own motivation. The reason they're doing this is because they want to belong. That's part of their goal here. So yeah, that ambition, that drive, that wanting to get over to the country and so forth is all built in here. So one way to just do the same function, but in differentiated ways, different types of learner. Let's go more quickly through this group. Again, a lexical function this time, talking about the weather. So the terminology for talking about weather, and same learners, but doing a different kind of task. So learner A gets a list of vocabulary with the usual list. Here's the, let's say, German, and on this side here, the English translation. And they get a program online. We give them flashcards with those vocabulary items on them. And their task is write out sentences on the whiteboard using those new vocabulary. Kind of old school. And because that's who this learner is, this is the one that's a little bit more, I'm in my world here. Please don't make me act anything out. Just give me the language that I need. But I'm good with it. I'm good with I'll learn those words. But this is for that kind of learner. Our learner B now is being given a digital weather report with a narrative and a list of all the vocab words that are part of that weather report. And they get, as their task, to identify all the vocabulary related to weather in the article that you gave them and give their English equivalents. So they're still learning the new vocabulary, but they're doing it now in a little bit more robust situation, a situation where they're going to have to interact with the language a bit more. Now, remember who our learner C was. For them, moving them up, we're giving them a radio broadcast, so just an oral listened version of a weather report from somewhere where our language is spoken, and a transcript of that same report. So they've got the oral, the heard, listened version, and they've got a print version. They can see what they're hearing. And their task then is to prepare a similar broadcast, convey what information you got from, let's say, in my case, it might be from St. Petersburg in Russia, is to say, okay, I'm going to give you that same information, but from my hometown. So if the Russian one said, today in St. Petersburg, the temperature is blah, blah, the winds are from the north, expect snow in the later afternoon, you kind of the usual broadcast for a day, give that same weather report, but now for where you live. Again, relevance, 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 make it about them. And then our good old learner D, this is our, I know why I'm in your class, so I'm just going to go for it. They get a televised weather broadcast with the conditions over wherever our languages are. We give them the key vocabulary, again, from that broadcast. And their task then is we turn the sound off on the video, and they provide the voiceover for the video after they've heard it. Not to repeat it, but to, in a sense, kind of give voice to it, right? So again, here you can see how the 4 different types of learners are given very different kinds of tasks that still get at the same material. But for very different purposes, for reasons, almost for different goals of being in the language class at all. Because our learners are not monolithic. Our learners are not one big standard type of learner. So what does it mean about our differentiated instruction and our Gen Z learners? Take a look. First thing that the most, oh, I will, I'm sorry, my bad, I will, I'll get us through this. Thank you, thank you. So authentic materials, probably the most important base of what we're doing here. For authentic materials, remember everyone, please. I mean, if you haven't, you know, we're looking at everything from menus in the language, films, recordings of pop music, metro cards, tickets, a Coca-Cola can in Arabic, a newspaper from country. As much as we can avoid materials that are processed for language learning and instead use materials that are used in our language as speakers of the language, the better. Why? Because, again, they give our learners a sense that they are learning from the same materials that they will see and encounter and work with if and when they do get to the regions where the languages are spoken. An example, let me quickly go through, because I love this piece. So I love that. I like advertisements in general because they're short, they're terse, and they make sense of a lot of, you know, they're trying to persuade us to buy something or to do something. But they come with text, visuals, and background. I'm going to put it all together. It's in Spanish. You don't need to speak Spanish to get, I think, what's going on here. So I'm going to tell you, this really appealed to me when I first heard this piece. I thought this is going to be great for our beginning Spanish classes to talk about family and to talk about kind of jobs. What does everybody do? And then I watched it a second time and thought, I can't use this in class. I want you to kind of see if you can figure out both things.
En esta familia, todos somos diferentes. Mi hija, siempre con 1000 maletas.
Necesito opciones, papá.
Mi esposa, siempre leyendo. Y mi hijo, que prefiere hablar inglés.
I understand Spanish, Dad.
Ah, ¿y tú qué, papá?
Dale a cada personaje espacio para brillar. El completamente nuevo Lexus TX de 3 filas.
And there we are. So what is so great about this? You say, yeah, this is great. Why don't we all use this in whatever language we're doing? Because it is. My son, he's like this. My daughter, she's like that. My wife, she's like this. And then daughter says, and dad, who are you like? And he smiles and he's the reggaetonero. He likes to listen to reggaeton music. So why is this not? Unless you really do say a lot about the context of that video, why is this probably not a great one to use in class? If I were trying to be an equitable, thoughtful instructor of differentiated learning. What's the suggestion in that video? The word is up there in case you need a hint. Please skip. First, it's a very unconventional nuclear family, right? The two female identified characters, they're fashionistas and bloggers and, and the two males, they're so yes, and they're driving a Lexus. I guess, sure, none of my family drove a Lexus. Right, yeah, so it's not that it's a bad video, that you'd nix it, but you want to contextualize it. Any material you're using
in esta familia
in the context. So instead, let me just quickly go through this and I'll up here. So as you think about using your materials in a DI classroom, first think about the tasks. This is all reverse design. What is the goal or the goal or product for any given task that you're doing? So like I go back saying, is it vocabulary? Is it you're trying to get them to talk about weather or to talk about themselves? What do you want them to do? And then think about what levels are you dealing with? Are they all at the same level? Probably not. So think about the differentiation of the level. What are your learners like who you're going to be giving these tasks to? So you're reverse designing these tasks. Then focus. What vocabulary are you looking at? Is there a particular grammar you're trying to work on? Are you looking at pragmatic or cultural material? Probably a mixture of these things, right? So that they can do these tasks. Now then, the most important part, so then what does the material you're going to give them offer each one of them in terms of authenticity of the content and relevance to the learner's identity. So if I'm a learner who doesn't like that involvement, can you give me a task that will keep me comfortable and feel good to be learning my language in your classroom? If I really don't want to do group work, although I know I still need to get the language to be able to do group work, how can you, instructor, facilitate that for me? I really love being in a crowd and all that. Can you help me do that? So that's kind of our model. Outcomes, same thing. You want to think of what are the linguistic, what makes the learner appropriate, a reasonably accurate use of grammatical materials. What were the communicative outcomes of what they produced, rhetorically, pragmatically, semantically, what did they employ? And then very important always to look at the cultural level was culturally level appropriate content did the individual bring to the interaction? Did they use the right forms of address, the right level of honorifics, if we're talking about a language like, say, Korean or Japanese? Did the learner reflect? How did the material reflect their own identity? What did they produce that shows what they're like? So projects to put it all together, and as I said, this is the last of it here, and I'll just give you a quick sample. This is in Russian of talking about a restaurant activity where they're asked to go to a website which is still working even now in Russia, that will call up a variation of shape. Looks like, there it is. Restaurants, in this case, Moscow, but just about every city has a version of this where you can get what kind of food you like, how much you have to, you want to spend, the kind of food it is or the kind of establishment that it is, and how to get to it. What's the closest metro station? It tells you everything about what you need. And now your students can go in and pick out the restaurants that fit their budget, what their abilities are to travel to or get to different restaurants, what kinds of food do they like, and here's where they take in consideration things like veganism or vegetarianism, religious restrictions on certain types of food and so forth, but they can really do this assignment as themselves. It's not us saying you're, Sasha and Masha, Sasha's from Minsk and Sasha's from Pinsk or whatever, and you're going to become these fake people, but rather you can be yourself in the culture and using the language. So what they come out with at the end of all this is then asking those same questions I just posed, but based on the exercises that the task that they just did. But they're going to come up in other words with the material for you to be able to make those outcomes again for inclusive and equitable differentiation. If we are doing all of these things, and you will see that at the novice mid-level, for the same setup, identify the restaurants you want, what kind of food you like, and how much you can spend. Some students will, at the novice mid-level, be able to simply say, so find a restaurant that fits these criteria. Write down the name, the address, the telephone number, the restaurant, and the metro. Real simple. But for a student who's, say, at the intermediate mid-level, same setup. Identify the restaurant, blah, blah, blah. Find a restaurant that fits your criteria. Invite your friends to join you at dinner at that restaurant. Give the relevant information, say something about the place that'll make them want to come join you. They're at the intermediate mid-level. And let's say, yes, you have that outlier student who's now at the threshold of advanced. Same task, but theirs will be, same criteria, but their task will be call the restaurant and make plans to hold your friend's birthday party there and consider dietary needs, seating arrangements, negotiate, that is who should sit next to whom, and also say you want to negotiate some entertainment for the evening, but you still need to stay within your budget. You only have a certain number of rubles to spend. You can't spend too much on the band. So that each group of learners gets to feel they have performed themselves within the framework of the same task that you gave everyone. So I finish with this one slide that's kind of my mantra now since, I guess around 2020, as we all fell behind computer screens during COVID. And I really felt that we as a nation had a national reckoning with race and racism in our country, with the murders of a number of individuals like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, among others. And I thought it was very important that we finish as individual instruction tells our students, be who you are in our classrooms, is to not forget who we are in our classrooms, that we are also individual and individuated instructors, so that we should teach who we are to our students, but never, never be someone else in the classroom. Please always teach as we are in our classrooms, so that you are actually the ones who help make our learners of all different backgrounds feel welcome in those classrooms. You need to feel good in the classroom for them to feel good in the classroom. So please teach who you are and teach as you are. And with that, I will bring us to a close with any questions, comments, feedback, pushback, objections. Throw things at me, do whatever you need to do. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I apologize. I know I went over. I know I always. Let's switch. Yes, please, please.
Tom, thank you so much for this very important talk at this very crucial moment. I think you gave us a lot of food for thought, lots of, no. Lots of good ideas of what we can do in our own way to help support our students and to make language learning even more valuable and more important and more inclusive. So thank you for that. Because we have gremlins in our technology today, I will repeat back the questions that any of you may have so that our online audience can hear them as well. Mijong. Let me recap that so that our online audience isn't at a loss here. So what I captured is the question is around assessment. Differentiated instruction is best for students, but it requires a lot of work on behalf of the faculty member. How can we assess the different modes, and what do we do with students in one and the same classroom who are at differing proficiency levels?
Yes, and indeed, that is to me the main part of this. You asked also at the very beginning the question of why are we getting so many of these student services letters, so accommodation letters, as we call them at Texas, student accommodation letter. You're right. I don't think that's simply anecdotal. I think it is fact that the percentage of our learners who are coming into our classrooms, not just language classrooms, across our universities, asking for accommodations, especially for neurodivergency or different emotional concerns, and for things like, extra time on assignments, variation on when can I hand things in or not hand them in, longer time to take tests and things like that. You're completely right. And I think there are two big contributors to why maybe three. I'll have a third. I just thought of a third. But the two that immediately come to mind to me, one, COVID. We're dealing with this generation coming out of online only instruction, then sort of hybrid instruction, and then now face-to-face. And they are truly at sea. They're nervous. I'm generalizing, but not all of them are, but many of them are very nervous. They're very uncomfortable. They're unsure about outcomes. That's the second part of your question. How are you going to assess me? We got lots of A's when we were on Zoom. I got A's in all my classes. We were told, do you remember COVID A's? We were told if the student was there and they did something, give them an A. And just because we don't want lawsuits, right? Because we don't know how we've done teaching online, to be blunt, right? We don't know how good this is working, right, or not. Anyway, so that's the one big factor. The second big factor is partly the Gen Z quotient, which is they are more aware of themselves personally and are trying. I think they do, in my view, more self-care. I think they initiate those accommodations by saying, I don't feel comfortable in this or that class. And they go and ask for it. And the third bit I realized at the end, and part of it too, is we're doing a better job at seeing students not as a homogeneous group. We know that they're different and we try to accommodate them. Good on us that we're trying to do DI in a way. So long answer, good, but a very good question. Now, assessment, you're absolutely right. We don't teach algebra. Language is not fact-based. Are there wrong bits to it? Yes. There is a correct ending. There is a correct word. We know what is correct in the grammar. We know what's correct in lexicon. We also know that a very important movement that's afoot right now is called the translanguaging movement, that not always what's in the book is what is spoken in this or that diasporic region of our language. We know that there are Spanishes and Frenches, and it's hard to say, Russians is, But there's versions or variants of our language spoken everywhere. Now, I'm not saying we give students full credit for every one of these variants and allow for everyone. What I am saying is we're not like 1 + 1 is 2 in teaching languages. We are more about getting to the language, but through what process? And therefore, if indeed we are doing DI, task-based instruction, we need to do DI, task-based assessment. And yes, your point, very well taken. Started off with that thing saying, you know, we're not doing this because it's easier, we're doing it because it's hard, because outcomes are so good. The first year that you decide you're going to move to DI and practice it, it's work. I'm not going to lie. I worked in the entirety of the summer only on changing it was a 4th-year Russian class to differentiated instruction. It took me most of the summer. I used up almost all my summer to set up my one course for the next fall. But once you do it the first time, it begins to pay off very quickly. And you can obviously recycle tasks, and it becomes easier both to adapt tasks that you already created to a new learner or a different learner, and they come to you more quickly. Every year that I've done DI, I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And every year I do it, it's easier for me now. And now at this point, at 10 years, it doesn't take me any more time to prep my classes than it did under a traditional class, traditional textbook method. I don't use a textbook anymore. I don't use a textbook at all, not for first year, not for fourth. I use authentic materials that I bring to class that follow a curriculum. Because the differentiation means the tasks are so different and the assessment is so different for each group's learner or each individual. Now, I'm hoping you're thinking does that mean that students are being evaluated differently? Oh, yes. They have done different kinds of work. A student who is doing one particular type, I will assess on their ability to do that work that they've done, not against this student who's already, I would have put in 3rd year, who's in my 1st year class, for whatever reason. But that student, I will be giving assessment that's based on a different kind of task. So there is a through line that is my curriculum, but in terms of how I'm assessing them, they're being assessed on their own abilities. So yes, they are different. I tell them, here's your task. That's the one place where my positionality is still instructor, right? I'm serious. I try to be incredibly equitable in my class. I don't want to be their friend, but I am still the instructor. And so when I get information about who they are, when I've taught the first week of class, you're getting to know each other. And I know who's who in my class by about the 10th class day. So when we get to, say, the unit on shopping, let's say, I'm the one who says, okay, you're going to do that here. I know you're going to love this. And I might give you even a choice, do A or B, but I know the kind of task I would give. Another student, I'm going to give 2 different tasks. So no, I'm going to be giving you a task based on where I know you are. And I'm going to be old school about that, by the way. I'm the old Krashen I+1, input always one level higher than what you're able to produce. So they'll still be challenged. And that's what I want from this, because I know what you're talking about, right? The heritage speaker, or maybe a native speaker who somehow sneaked into your class somehow and is saying, I'm taking 1st year Korean, even though I'm actually, I arrived from Seoul a year ago. And those students, you're going to say, this is what task you should be doing in my class. You may stay in this class, but you're going to have to work.
We do have a question on Zoom.
Please.
Grit, if you are still there, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question was partially answered because I wasn't sure I quite understand. So you personally make the distinguish which learner gets which tasks?
Yes, although I always give them a choice of those tasks. I mean, I know what frame of tasks, like I will put in my own mind, this is a learner A type or has this particular identity. And so I will give them a choice of a couple of tasks that they can then pick from. But yes, I craft the tasks for them.
And the students are aware of this?
Yes.
Students get other tasks?
Correct. And that in fact becomes I found that to be part of the kind of self-motivation in the classroom is they're very interested in what the other learners are doing. So it's not always while you have someone reading out, the other students are kind of sitting there just kind of checking their cell phone and all. They're really interested in what this learner or that learner is doing that's different from what they did. They're really interested in each other's projects. Yeah, I found that to be one of the big benefits of DI.
And you're not worried that students might complain or might feel disadvantaged or
in 10 years have never had them complain, well, so-and-so's task was so much easier than my task. They've never said that. But I think if anything they feel is, especially when they all do some group work at some point, or at least pair work, is they feel that there is maybe this is a Gen Z feature of empathy. They want to support each other's work. And so they might work by choosing who their partner is to work with a student who is at a slightly lower level or a slightly higher level to complement what they're doing in the class. I'm not trying to sound Pollyanna here and just say, oh, it's so fabulous. No, I've had all kinds of different pushback from students who might say, oh, this task was so difficult. It was hard for me. This was really hard. I said, well, was it impossible? Did you just say I couldn't do it? No, I struggled to do it. Yeah, well, there we are. We're happy. We're both happy because your Russian is slightly better now, and you probably feel as though you actually achieved something. You're going to be proud of this work, that kind of thing. I've never had someone say, well, why is person A, this person over here doing this, getting credit for doing that when I have to do so much more work? And this is indeed where at the point where I explain, well, they're being evaluated very differently, assessed. And everyone so far, seems, and this is year 10 of doing this, and I haven't had anyone throw anything at me yet. Thank you for the question.
So what we will do, because of our technology gremlins, we will say thank you to our distinguished speaker again. We will let our online audience go. And then for those of you who are here, feel free during our reception to keep asking questions of Dr. Garza, but let's give him another round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And good luck to everybody for the rest of the semester. Thank you for joining us.
Stay well, everyone. Take care.
Exactly.
There's a lot of emotional energy that we're just pouring out of our bodies every day that we're alive right now. So please take care of yourselves. It's not just about your physical well-being, it's your mental and emotional well-being. Stay well. Yes.